Good afternoon to all of our audience today joining us at this important and timely discussion on women's rights under authoritarian regimes organized by Set Them Free. We advocate for women's rights with a focus on Turkey and globally raise awareness on the violations against human rights defenders and empower women refugees. I am Cemre Ülker, co-founder of Set Them Free, the civil initiative, and UN representative of the Journalists and Writers Foundation. Today, we will host several distinguished experts, journalists to cover different countries' violations on women's rights. And I will be leading this discussion with Hafsa Girdab, as she has been my partner in founding Set Them Free, and she is also the executive director of Advocates of Silence Turkey. We are right now live through NGO CSW events platform and Set Them Free's YouTube channel. Throughout the discussion, I encourage everyone to share their opinions, insights, and questions to any specific experts in the panel through the chat here in Zoom or over YouTube for us to cover them in depth in the Q&A session. Before we set the stage for today's agenda, I would like to acknowledge that we stand in solidarity with the brave Ukrainian women and will continue to support them in all possible means, all women who have been bravely defending their nation's freedom since day one. It is a very tragic truth that at a time, such as Commission on the Status of Women, where member states are gathering with women's rights advocates in all around the world in partnership with UN agencies, we should have been discussing the full implementation of SDG 5, gender equality, through the promotion of right to achieve quality education, digital technologies, how to eliminate the gender pay gap among the other countless proactive policies. But we do indeed still have to talk about the ways to combat crimes against aggression. And I must also put a stress on the universality of human rights. Crimes against humanity, different forms of political, social persecution are taking place all around the world, and we must take the same conscious awareness towards every country where individuals' dignity, their right to live in peaceful societies are violated. Coming back to our agenda today, women's empowerment and all forms of civil, political, fundamental freedoms are under serious attack in different parts of the world. And as human rights advocates, we do acknowledge that regardless of the differences in ethnicities, religions, and culture, authoritarian regimes are endorsing very similar forms of abusive policies, instruments to exclude women and girls from all spheres of social and economic life. We will listen to experts who will cover this topic from their own lenses, focusing on Iran, Afghanistan, Uyghur and Yazidi women. But on a global level, the status quo of women's rights under authoritarian regimes are posing a great challenge and threat to the effective implementation of the Security Council Resolution 1325, the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. As indicated by its Article 11, this landmark resolution emphasizes the responsibility of all states to put an end to impunity and to prosecute those responsible for genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, including those relating to sexual and other forms of violence against women and girls. It stresses the need to exclude these crimes from amnesty provisions. And there are enough UN resolutions, conventions, and many other international human rights mechanisms existing to protect women's rights in war zones, conflict situations, and of course, under authoritarian regimes. But as civil society stakeholders, leaders, we must facilitate ways to ensure the political will to implement all these forms of human rights agendas and tools. At this point, I would like to turn to Hafsa for her introductory remarks and to share insights from Turkey, as through different civil society engagements platforms, we both specialize in monitoring women's rights violations in Turkey. For the last 2 decades, women's rights have been in constant turmoil in Turkey. Repressive policy actions, derogatory public statements of high-ranking public officials, impunity against sexual crimes, femicide, and most strikingly, the withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention have further set back women's rights to live and exercise their civil and political rights. But of course, Turkey did not end up this stage overnight. It was almost 2 decades of phasing out from the promotion of women's rights and girls' empowerment. Hafsa, would you like to take it from there on?
Yeah, thank you, Cemre. Thank you for this beautiful introduction, informative introduction. And I want to say before starting that I feel really empowered and strong with all these women here in this panel. Thank you so much for joining us. As just you mentioned, as an activist and an academic at AST, at Settemfree, at Stony Brook, my work is deeply focused on the status of women and women's rights and violence against women in oppressive regimes, specifically in Turkey. And in Turkey, the regime that controls the government and has ever since been based on male-dominated, patriarchal and militaristic mindset. And recently, this mindset has merged with political Islamist thought and discourse, which expanded the extent and forms of violence to really, wide scopes. And the regime in Turkey since 2016, as just you mentioned, maybe a bit earlier, shifted from democracy towards authoritarianism. In terms of women's issues, it has never been ideal in the historical context, yet such a shift brought about grave violations, violence, and oppressive through not only discourses, but also dysfunctional or ill-intended legal means. A turning point in that regard is withdrawal from the Istanbul Convention, which has aggravated the struggle for women's rights and also the implementation of laws. And this drastic situation, the lack of implementing domestic and international laws, is worsening every day. Women, human rights advocates who are basically dissidents or critics of the state oppression are stigmatized as terrorists. And this case results in mass arbitrary incarcerations. Even though it's almost impossible to access a reliable data, there are more than 5,000 women political prisoners in Turkey's jails. There is a horrifying increase in femicide cases. Drawing on the similarity among autocratic regimes and their approaches to women, I'm now turning to Masih. I'm sure you recall lots of parallel things in your mind when you think about Iran and women in Iran. Before hearing your own experience and reflections from all women's experiences in Iran, I'd like to introduce you, Masih. Masih Alinejad is an Iranian-American journalist and author. She currently works as a representative producer at WOA Persian Service, a correspondent for Radio Farda, a frequent contributor to Manato Television, and a contributing editor to Iran Wire. Alinejad is well known for her criticism of Iranian authorities. She now lives in exile in New York City and has won several awards, including a Human Rights Award from UN Watch's 2015 Genoa Summit for Human Rights, the Omid Journalism Award from the Mehdi Shamsar Foundation, and highly commended AIB Media Excellence Award. In 2014, Alinejad launched My Stealthy Freedom, also known as Stealthy Freedoms of Iranian Women, a Facebook page. I know that you have millions of followers, Masih, that invites Iranian women to post pictures of themselves without hijab. The page quickly attracted international attention and has garnered hundreds of thousands of likes. Masih, you challenged the compulsory hijab, that issue that is enforced in Iran by the government, by the regime. So becoming a threat for the regime, you had to leave the country, you needed to flee. And as a dissident myself, I know that being a dissident either in your own country or in a different one has its own risks. You were a target of a kidnapping plot here in New York, but it failed, fortunately. And I read an interview on NPR that you were saying through your social media accounts, you reach millions of people. And as a woman challenging an authoritarian regime's oppression on women, what would you say to us, to our audience? And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. What an introduction. I really appreciate that, my sister. And I have to say that I'm looking to every single person here, your beautiful faces, and it just empowers me and it gives me hope that when it comes to women's rights, we are all together. From different countries, we have same pain, but at the same time, same goal. So I have to say that when I was looking at every single person joining to this conference, I was like, oh my God, this is my dream. This simple thing, simple frame that we all see, it's my dream. And it's the dream of millions of other women in Iran and Afghanistan to be together like this. You're wearing hijab. I'm not wearing it. But Iran will kick me out if I invite you to my country. Definitely they will kick me out because they don't accept me the way that I am. And I couldn't even believe that. In 21st century, I start my presentation, my talk, focusing on such a small thing. Millions of people around the world take this for granted. But for us, this is the first step towards full equality. If we remove our hijab in Iran, in Afghanistan, we won't exist. But let me make it clear. Of course, my campaign is against compulsory hijab, but my main focus is not about hijab. It's about separation of politics and religion. This is our goal. And this should be the goal of all people around the world. So we're all now participating in UN conference. How ironic. I'm coming from a country that women won't exist if they don't wear hijab. All the laws are against women. Women are not able to go to a stadium. Women are not allowed to ride a bicycle. Women are not allowed to sing. Women are not allowed to be a president. Women are not allowed to be a judge. Women are not allowed to travel abroad without getting permission from their husband. But the UN gave the top seats to Iranian government to monitor women's rights globally. This is an insult to all of us, not only to women in Iran. 4 democratic countries voted for Islamic Republic to have a top seat on Women's Council in United Nations. And I want to tell you that right now that we are all sitting here, we see that how all the European countries, the Western countries got united and rightfully and beautifully showed their solidarity with the brave people of Ukraine. That is amazing. But this is missing when we, the people of Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, were facing the war in the Middle East. So today I'm here actually to name and shame those democratic countries who voted for Islamic Republic, who voted for Russia to have a seat on Human Rights Council and Women's Rights Council at the United Nations, where we are now getting together to talk about women's rights. My sisters, I strongly believe that we, every single individual activist here, we don't need the Western countries to come and save us. But betraying our fight, betraying our civil disobedience within the society, it's an important thing that we have to point out and talk about this. I want to actually share the story of a young teenager who got beheaded recently. Her name was Mona Haydari. When she was only 12 years old, she was forced to marry her cousin in Iran. She escaped to go to Turkey, to your beautiful country, because she was trying to be safe. With the help of the Turkish government and Iranian government, she was forced to go back to Iran, to my beautiful country, but it was not beautiful for her. She was beheaded by her husband. So you see, I gave you this picture. I shared this story to tell you that when it comes to oppressed women of Iran and Turkey, our governments are united. Now hundreds of refugees, women especially, they escaped from Iran to be safe and free and have dignity in Turkey. But with the help of the Turkish government. They all are forced to go back to Iran, or they are actually suffering under Turkish governments. So you see, dictators, not only from Turkey to Iran, from Taliban, from China, Venezuela, Russia, dictators are more united than us, freedom fighters. Why I'm claiming that? Because here in New York, here in the West, when we, the women of Iran and Afghanistan, when we are shouting that under Islamic law, under political Islam, under Sharia laws, we don't have dignity, we don't have freedom, we don't have the chance to express ourselves even miles away from Iran, miles away from Afghanistan. We're not even safe in the West to talk about Islamism. Guess what happened? Instead of seeing solidarity from our global feminist movement, from our sisters, we see that they're abandoning us. We see that many feminists around the world rather actually bow to Islamism, but they don't talk against political Islam. They don't talk against Taliban and Islamic Republic when we needed them to do. So for years and years, as you know, that the Russian activists who were anti-Putin, they were calling the rest of the world, isolate Putin. They were saying that words have power. Don't give democratic title to dictator like Putin. Don't call them president. Right now, what you see in Ukraine is the result of not listening to Russian activists. Now, many activists around the world, from Turkey, from Venezuela, from China, from Iran, from Afghanistan, saying the same. Don't actually call those dictators presidents or leaders. Women of Afghanistan, it breaks my heart. With one hand, they're holding a poster bill or a sign saying that to the world, hear us. With another hand, they're pushing back Taliban. But I'm asking you, the world is hearing them properly, paying attention to them? Many women are in prison right now in Iran, and they're actually calling the rest of the world that do not legitimize our oppressors, the way that women of Afghanistan saying, do not legitimize Taliban. You think that the democratic country is paying attention to them? No. So that is why I strongly believe that what is missing here, it's sisterhood. This is what we need. As I mentioned from the beginning, we don't want the democratic country come and save us, but we want them not to save Taliban, not to save the Islamic Republic, not to save the Erdogan's regime, not to save the Chinese regime. Is that too much to ask? I don't think so. But many people in the West say that when we share our stories against political Islam, they say that you're causing Islamophobia. Today, I am here to tell you that my fear of Islamism, my fear of ISIS, my fear of Taliban, my fear of Islamic Republic, my fear of every single Sharia laws are rational, because phobia is irrational. But I ask many feminists who tell us, shh, you're causing Islamophobia. They tell me in the West that, would you be happy to go and live under Sharia laws in Iran or Afghanistan? Tell me, what is their response? No. Strong no. We deserve to have the same freedom and dignity as you do, my feminist sisters in the West. So let us talk. This is the hashtag. Let us talk. We, the women of the Middle East, finally got united, because the only thing that we can learn from dictators is the solidarity, which is missing among us. All the dictators are united and they show their solidarity. They help each other. They support each other. And this is the right time that we, the women around the world who are fighting against oppressive regime, who are fighting against dictators, we must get united as well. If not, believe me, we have to face Islamism, and we have to face dictators, the oppressors in the West as well. That's the only message that I have, not only for myself, for many women in the Middle East who have been suffering for years and years from political Islam, from Islamic ideology, that this is the right time. Instead of keeping us silent, just get united. And last thing, when Taliban, ISIS, and Islamic Republic attack or do terrorism acts in the West, they're never gonna ask what kind of parties you belong. What is your political view? Are you supporting the right wing, left wing, liberal? No, they never ask about your political opinion. They attack you, they kill you. So for that, when it comes to women's rights, we should think about supporting each other bipartisan. We should bury our political view. We should care about human rights first. We should put women's rights and human rights first. That's my goal, and I'm sure together we are stronger. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Masih. Oh my God, I have, goosebumps right now. And your remarks are really important. I have a lot in my mind. They are, spinning around. But the point that you touched upon about UN or Western, countries' approach to Muslim women or women in the East is remarkable. Putting Iran or other countries, autocratic countries in the committee, which is about, women's rights. It's ironic, but more than beyond ironic. It's, dangerous.
It is.
Yeah. And the idea that you put forward, the solidarity idea, authoritarian leaders are coming together. They, combine their powers. In a way, they establish solidarity. So why not we go and, establish solidarity among us, raising our voices all together. We have intersectional identities. With hijab, without hijab, white, women of color, but we face the same oppression. So why not come together and, fight against this oppression altogether? Thank you so much, Masih. Cemre, would you like to add anything about Masih's presentation?
Yes, definitely. And I really liked how, Masih, you underlined that we are not criticizing any woman's choice of clothing, their way of living style or beliefs. And we are not, of course, against our beloved home countries. I do love Turkey as well. And
of course.
It's my beloved home country, but we are against the oppressive regimes, the political agendas behind suppressing women's rights. And we stand for women's ability to be able to choose how they want to live. That's very important.
Exactly.
And definitely, just like Hafsa also said, I was privileged to listen to your powerful remarks in Oslo Freedom Forum as well. And the one thing that I really took away was the same emphasis that Hafsa also shared. Dictators are more united than us. And it's a shameful situation for us civil society leaders, because we stand for peace, we stand for women's rights advocacy, yes. And we should find more collaborative ways to combat these oppressions. Thank you so much. And I delightfully followed your successful mobilization on Twitter as well with the Let Us Talk hashtag. That was wonderful. And it really encouraged countless women to share their personal stories and empower others, showing that nobody is really alone in this fight. And many thanks once again.
Thank you so much. And unfortunately, I have to go, but I want to actually hug you. And don't be scared of being labeled from dictators telling you that you don't love your countries. We love our countries more than they do. They actually hate our countries. And actually, the dictators are ruining the image of our country. We are showing the beautiful side of our countries, the side that the mothers of those people who got killed in Iran powerfully speaking up. So that shows that this is the beautiful side of Iran. Thank you so much. I love you so much, and I have to go.
Thank you so much, Masih, for your participation. That was great to have you. Okay, turning back to Rayhan Asat. Now we will hear her remarks. Rayhan is a non-resident senior fellow with the Strategic Litigation Project at the Atlantic Council. As an international human rights lawyer, she focuses on international human rights, atrocity prevention, the rule of law, civil liberties, corporate accountability, and international law. She is a graduate of Harvard Law School and former anti-corruption attorney at a major US law firm. Rayhan previously advised the World Bank and OECD to design human-centered business integrity principles, and now works with civil society, diplomats, and lawmakers to address various human rights concerns. The Chinese government has imprisoned more than millions of people who have been Uyghurs, subjected to intense surveillance, religious restrictions, forced labor, and different forms of crimes against humanity. And officials have been refusing to share information on the detention centers, preventing journalists, investigators from monitoring the situation. And Rayhan, could you please inform us when did this mass detention started? And please do share with us an overview of the crimes against humanity that Uyghur women in particularly are combating. And you are also very successful leading different global channels of campaigns for your own brother, Akbar Asat, who was attending the State Department Leadership Training Program, a very successful tech entrepreneur, and he arbitrarily disappeared as he returned back to home. The floor is yours.
Hi, Jamra, and thank you so much for having me. First, I would like to say that the very fact that this month is the Women's History Month, and for you guys to convene this incredibly important event is just very much commendable. So I very much appreciate to be part of this wonderful discussion. Whenever I talk about women's rights issues, the first thing that comes to mind is the 1995 Women's Conference in Beijing. And it was in that conference when Secretary Clinton said women's rights are human rights. And I think that was in many ways a turning point for women's rights in all across the world, in addition to the Convention on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It's an international treaty. And, from a country that hosts these Women's Conference in 1995, now the Chinese government found itself in being accused of committing genocide. I think across the world, when it comes to women's rights issues, we have made many strides, but at the same time, we've seen a lot of rights infringements and violations across the board. Women's right to live free from gender violence, discriminations, having equal access to education, as well as not being sexually abused by partners, or whether the current forms of discussion on Me Too movements that are affecting, even in the West society, I view that it's manifests in different countries in different forms and shapes. And in China, in many ways, it is the highest forms of manifestation. And one way to look at it is that since 2016, the Chinese government has locked up millions of people in the Chinese concentration camps. And in many ways, because the state showed this policy of the highest form of racism against a singular ethnic group, the Uyghurs in this sense. And the reason why is that Uyghurs are culturally and ethnically, they're Turkic. It's their Turkic heritage. They practice different religion, they practice different culture, vastly different from the majority Han. And the Chinese government often use the fight against extremism to counter and detain people in the concentration camps, stripping people of human dignity. And when we talk about mass atrocities, one thing we need to highlight is that often women and children are the primary targets of mass atrocities. And they ultimately becomes the victims of the state terror. I try not to use the word victims because, if anything, women have shown nothing but resilience and grace in the face of injustice. And they are rights holders. They're survivors. They're Masih and everybody else, in this panel. Women are leading movements. Women have shown incredibly resilience. They're teaching us the value of fighting for just causes and standing up against oppressive governments and leading movements with compassion and generosity. So I try not to use the word victim, but at the same time, in China, the ways in which this gender violence is manifested is through the state's attack against women's reproductive rights, and by forcibly sterilizing Uyghur women to prevent the next generation of Uyghur children, and curtailing the population of Uyghur births. So right now, like, and the other form is that, I'm also very much against forced hijab, but I also am very much against the state dictating how women choose what kind of religious attire they want to wear or not. So in China, they prohibit women wearing like hijab or any sorts of like symbols that shows religious piety, for example. And that in itself is a violation against religious freedom. And I've seen that, in many ways in China, it started to like, it's really an attack against human dignity. So a lot of women in these circumstances, they don't have agency to fight against the oppressor. So because what happens if you dare to do so is that you're going to be sent to the concentration camps. And that's why, like, often women are forcibly sterilized. They have no choice. Or in the extreme cases, that one, I think particularly for me is incredibly disturbing, is the sexual violence and abuses happening in these camps. The Chinese government rolled out what they called a becoming family policy. So the becoming family policy means that the state arranges Han civilians into the Uyghur homes. And often in these kind of family households, women, the men of that family are in the camps, and the women had to sleep with these Han men. And often it paves the way for sexual abuse. And in additionally, obviously a lot of women in these camps, survivors of these camps, did detail horrific accounts of sexual abuse, even in the camps. Because what happens is that there's so much power dynamic. In the camps, you have these guards who are making sure how you conform to state terror and control. So that's why, like, it often leads to sexual abuse. And that is just like horrific crimes that are happening. But despite that, despite all of that, what I'm truly proud of is the Uyghur women and their resilience. Often we talk a lot about, sharing your pain, what has happened to you, whether in the forms of sexual violence and abuse, requires a lot of courage. But in China, and I think in a lot of authoritarian governments, it requires risks for you to tell this. Because not only the risk against your own security, but also against your family members' security. Oftentimes, if you were ever allowed to leave China or countries like, Taliban's control, you shut up because you're like just happy to save your life. But a lot of women are, even after they leave these horrific conditions, they're fighting against it to protect the other women who continues to be in the same position. So with that said, I'm truly proud of so many survivors continue to tell their stories, informing the world what's happening, raising awareness against gender violence and abuses, and telling the world that, if we don't address and mitigate these abuses, what we're gonna create is a culture of impunity. The perpetrators would continue to get away with their crimes. Women are continue to suffer in these authoritarian governments. So that's why I think we need to fight. Whether that fight, and I obviously, what I really hope is that we really need to understand that these kinds of infringements, despite they're manifested in different forms and shapes, but ultimately, these are women's rights violations, and we all need to fight against it in one ways. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rayhan. And I think it was really important that you started your remarks by underlining the Beijing platform, the platform for action, because back in '95, it was the turning point, the landmark occasion where new norms and sets of women's rights advocacy was declared and embraced by all participating member states. I really wish that the same origin of this important conference kept up its work of promoting women's rights, but at this point we are far away what it should be. And I would like to
yes. Add one thing just to be like holistic in terms of China's abuse.
Sure.
But on the different fronts, like if you look at the Han women who are the majority, I do say that China made a lot of good strides in terms of promoting gender equality of Chinese women, Han women, like, you know, the majority ethnic group. And you see a lot of women, even in China, you see a lot of women, for example, right? Like, and one modern phenomenon of women's rights, women in China is reflected in this fighting against this gender stereotyping, right? A lot of women choose to now, for example, remain even single and not be kowtowed to the cultural societal pressure and really embracing their own gender agency and to say that no to the society. Because, you know, in China, if you look at it in the past, there were practices of like even just tying women's feet, like, you know, there are a lot of like abusive, horrific abuses took place. But China did make these strides in terms of promoting gender equality, but against only towards the majority, but then they're targeting. So it's really complex, you know, when we talk of women's rights, like it's and it's important that we highlight all the differences and while acknowledging some of the progresses, but not shy away criticizing the horrific abuses. So thank you.
Sure, definitely. And it's just like you said, very important to distinguish those two landmarks. And of course, we do criticize the oppressive policies of such governments, the civil society activism, or some of the good actions remains in place. But a very quick follow-up question. I'm going to turn Hafsa for her any follow-up remarks. I know that the UN Special Representative of the Secretary General, focusing on the sexual violence in conflict situations, they do have important agendas in fighting back, combating the impunity against sexual gender-based crimes taking place in different parts of the world. Just want to follow up with you if any such UN offices took out important steps, actions, trying to get in touch with such member states to combat crimes against humanity against Uyghur women, or calling it genocide. Have you seen any progressive actions from such offices?
Not off the top of my head, but I know that, like, I think in general, against the Uyghur situation, there has been many reports that actually there's two, I believe, reports came out by the special rapporteurs, but not just specifically on women's issue, but in general, like, you know, for example, special rapporteur on countering terrorism or freedom of expression, like all of them, more than 50 came together and issued a statement against the broad situation of the Uyghurs. Not so much as calling it genocide, but rather address or urging the Chinese government to address these rights abuses and closing the camps.
Definitely. And these fighting backs, combating such crimes are unfortunately taking some time. They are long-term agendas, but I believe as civil society leaders, we should put more emphasis on such UN organizations, agencies, specifically working against impunity of sexual war crime zones or sexual gender-based crimes against such ethnicities. And we have to be present to raise more awareness. And Hafsa, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just a quick thought. You drew attention to, different dimensions of gender-based violence in conflict zones. And I strongly agree with the idea that the terminology, it's important, calling these women who face sexual abuses or rape, or, in conflicts on different types of oppression, calling them victims, it's not helping, their resilience, their fight, their combat, but instead using the survivor, because you emphasize their resilience. It's very important. It's empowering them, calling them. Terminology is really important, Rayhan. I really appreciate that you drew attention to that. And on the other hand, state-led violence, state-led sexual abuses leading to impunity. This is important, and this is a very important dimension of that kind of oppressions that we have to draw attention in the global context, because such an impunity in the international arena, it's very important to address. Thank you for bringing this up.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I would add just one comment, because the whole idea of us having this discussion is to empower women, not disempower them, right? Because if we're going to call them victims, then we would be disempowering them, because they don't have the agency to have these discussions with us in this moment. Yeah. So that's very important. I agree with you. And Jamra, I think last point I really want to highlight, because now the UN High Commissioner Michelle Bachelet is about to visit China to document and hopefully release her report. So far, she hasn't released her report, which is really disheartening. The urgency and gravity of these horrific rights abuses right now demand our immediate response. We can no longer wait. This crisis has been going on for so long. And for far too long, she hasn't been given unfettered access to the region. So she said she's going to release the report, but it's been like all this talk. Oh, she will release a report next month, and nothing has happened so far. And now what I would envision that would most likely happen is that these would be some sort of stage visit. The Chinese government would showcase these wonderful or some sort of like a little bit slightly better camps to show, oh, look, it's a vocational training camps. It's not some sort of re-education camps as they claim. So it's really important for her as a UN High Commissioner to issue these reports, and I really hope to see that kind of progress. So thank you so much. Sorry I've taken up so much time, but it's an incredibly important issue. Thanks.
Definitely, it was one of our highlights for today, and I do acknowledge the late reporting is very is kind of empowering the authoritarian regimes, but still glad to hear that some progress is at least taking place in terms of visits. And I really do hope and will work towards encouraging more mechanisms to be active in terms of monitoring and reporting. Thank you so much, Rayhan.
Thank you.
And let's turn to Nilofar Moradi to cover Afghanistan. She's a journalist at Payenda TV and a women's rights activist. She was the organizer of the program of women's political participation in the elections and a member of the tolerance and anti-radicalization discourse. Nilofar also served as the provincial coordinator of the Relief Organization for Rehabilitation of Afghanistan. She's a member of the Afghan Civil Society Network as well. Hundreds of thousands were forced to leave their homeland to be able to live in dignity with respect to their human rights after the Taliban's takeover last year, and millions are left to live in food insecurity. Girls' access to education is still banned, and women are being wiped out from all spheres of social, economic, civil life. And according to UNHCR, women and children make up to 80% of the forcibly displaced within Afghanistan. It's a huge number. However, fearless Afghan women continue to fight back against the oppressive policies, this regime, in every possible way, every single day. And we will listen to Nilofar as she will talk about the plight of women's rights in Afghanistan. And to translate her remarks, we have Tahmina Payenda with us. She's a young, empowered activist studying at Columbia University. Tahmina was already very active in Afghanistan to promote the girls' and young women's rights, her fellow colleagues and friends, and she continues her activism fighting back to gain their rights again. Thank you so much, Tahmina, for your contributions to facilitate Nilofar's remarks, and floor is yours.
Thank you, Jamra, for inviting both of us. And now I think we should start with Nilofar's remarks, and I'm happy to translate. جان میشه شروع کنین شما.
Thank you so much, جمره. سلام و وقت بخیر دارم خدمت همه دوستانی که در پنل هستند و تمام کسانی که صدای ما را میشنوند. تشکر میکنم از جمره جان که مرا در این برنامه دعوت کردن و از برگزار کنندگان برنامه ابراز سپاس و قدردانی دارم. محور بحث ما وضعیت زنان تحت حاکمیت طالبان است. نظر به تاپیک برنامه امروز ما چند موضوع را میخوایم اشاره بکنم که در افغانستان زنان نتونستند در طول تاریخ به حقوقشان برسند. متاسفانه در هیچ جایی از دنیا زنان به برابری و حقوقشان دست نیافتند، اما مبارزه بومی و شجاعانه زنان افغانستان در تمام ادوار تاریخ در افغانستان انجام دادن تا به حقوق اولیه و انسانیشان دست یابند، اما به دلایلی که این مبارزات و حق خواهی تبدیل به یک جنبش نشد و تا امروز در هر دوره از حکومت چه نظام جمهوریت و چه نظام طالبان ادامه داره که در 2 دهه به قدرت رسیدن طالبان حق خواهی زنان از پا درآمد و زنان در افغانستان سرکوب، خانه‌نشین، آواره و یا کشته شدند و ظلمی که سالها بر زنان در افغانستان روا داشته شده ناشی از فرهنگ، رسوم، ساختارهای فرهنگی، اجتماعی غیر انسانی، سیستم‌های مردسالاری، پدرسالاری، باورهای دینی و مذهبی در جامعه و برخورد سیاسی دینی با حقوق زنان است. در طول تاریخ این باورها در افغانستان مانع ترقی روشنگرایانه تامین حقوق اولیه و انسانی این زنان شده است و ادامه سرکوب به حاشیه راندن زنان. مورد دیگر جنگ‌های دوامدار 4 دهه جنگ در افغانستان. یک جامعه جنگ زده و توسعه نیافته همیشه در حال جنگ هیچگاه مسئله زنان در اولویت قرار نداشته و حتی بحث در مورد حقوق زنان تابو بوده است و کمتر به این موضوع پرداخته شده است. جوامع سنتی زنان را به عنوان مال، شی یا ناموس، ننگ و غیرت کوچک کردند به حوزه خصوصی مردان. به همین باور اکثریت جامعه با همسویی از پدیده اجتماعی مردسالاری و پدرسالاری حمایت کردند و برای این باورهایشان قاعده اصولی هم ساختند تحت نام دین، شرع، مذهب، کار را که طالبان میکنند و استدلالشان این است که ما طبق شرع و اسلام حقوق زنان را برایشان میدهیم. در 4 دهه جنگ در افغانستان قربانی اصلی جنگ و خشونت زنان و کودکان افغانستان بودند که از تمام حقوق اولیه‌شان محروم شدند، اما در 2 دهه اخیر با حضور امریکا و متحدانش در افغانستان و تشکیل حکومت انتقالی پس از نشست بن در افغانستان و دموکراسی نوپا زنان توانسته بودند با وجود چالش‌ها و نارسایی‌های زیادی به حداقلی حقوقشان دست یابند. کودکان دختر حق تحصیل داشتند، حق مکتب رفتن داشتند، زنان حق کار، حق رأی، حق کاندیدا شدن، حق رانندگی، حق سفر و حتی حق مشارکت سیاسی داشتند. توانسته بودند در سطوح مختلف کار کنند. قانون منع خشونت و منع اذیت و آزار زنان در افغانستان پاس شده بود. زنان در دستگاه قضایی افغانستان به حیث قاضی، سارنوال، وکیل مدافع کار میکردند. زنان در بخش‌های نظامی، پلیس، اردو، امنیت افغانستان وظیفه داشتند و یک بخش از چوکی‌های پارلمان به زنان در افغانستان تأسیس شده بود. زنان والی بودند، در بخش سینما فعالیت داشتند، در فیلم‌ها نقش بازی می‌کردند، در بخش مدلینگ فعالیت داشتند، زنان خبرنگار بودند و دسترسی به این حقوق آسان نبود. زنان قربانی‌های زیادی داده بودند تا با خانواده مبارزه کرده بودند، با جامعه جنگیده بودند تا پس از 20 سال به این حقوق دست یافته بودند. اما تمامی دستورهای ورزش‌های زنان یک شبه به تاریکی محض فرو رفت و در 15 آگوست 2021 جمهوری قضایی با حضور 20 ساله غرب در افغانستان و فرار اشرف غنی رئیس جمهور افغانستان سقوط کرد و دولت به دست طالبان افتاد. ما تجربه تلخ زندگی تحت حاکمیت طالبان را داشتیم. برای همین همواره نگرانی‌های ما را در مورد نشست نمایشی و پولیسی دوحه که آمریکا با طالبان برآورده انداخته بود ابراز می‌کردیم. سرنوشت 40 میلیون انسان خصوصا زنان را به دست طالبان نسپارید. اما آمریکا با امضای توافقنامه با طالبان در دوحه 5000 زندانی طالب که به قتل هزاران انسان در افغانستان متهم و محکوم بودند رها کرد و در تبانی با اشرف غنی و سرنوشت تمام مردم افغانستان با منابع انسانی، اقتصادی، طبیعی و زیرساخت‌ها به طالبان سپرد و زنان از همه حقوقشان محروم شدند و در پسته خانه‌ها رانده شدند. هزاران انسان از افغانستان آواره شد و سیلی از مهاجرت‌ها آغاز گردید. یک گروه توریستی جنگ سالار آدمکش که غیر از خون هیچ چیز دیگر را در افغانستان نمی‌شناسد حاکم افغانستان شد. ما از طالبان انتظار نداشتیم چون ما تجربه یک دور حکومت طالبان را در دهه 90 داشتیم، اما امریکا کشور مدعی دموکراسی و حقوق بشر و ارزش‌های نوین جهان مدرن چگونه توانست با مردم افغانستان چنین یک خیانت انجام بدهد؟ تا امروز که 7 ماه از حاکمیت طالبان در افغانستان می‌گذرد، دختران حق مکتب رفتن ندارند، زنان حق کار و حق تحصیل ندارند، حق انتخاب پوشش ندارند، حق سفر ندارند. زنان به صورت کلی از همه صحنه‌ها حذف و خانه‌نشین شدند. به همین منظور زنان شجاع افغانستان مبارزاتشان را علیه گروه طالبان از خیابان‌ها آغاز کردند و دست به اعتراض زدند. در مخالفت به قوانین وضع شده علیه زنان توسط طالبان که مطالبه این زنان حقوق اولیه 40 میلیون انسان که 4 دهه را در جنگ و زوال زندگی کردند بود، با شعار نان، کار، آزادی. شما دیدید طالبان چگونه این زنان را سرکوب کرد و ایده را در شهر مزار شریف بازداشت کردند و زنان تجاوز کردند و بعد از رها شدن جسد 6 زن فعال معترض در بلخ پیدا شد و بسیار از این زنان از طرف خانواده‌هایشان به قتل رسیدند و یا ترد شدند و به نام زن بدکاره تمام جامعه این زنان را نمی‌پذیرند. زنان معترض در جاده‌های کابل مورد تدقیق قرار گرفتند. خبرنگارانی که به پوشش خبری این اعتراضات رفته بودند از سوی طالبان بازداشت و شکنجه شدند و طالبان در مقابل زنان معترض اسپری فلفل، گاز اشک‌آور و اسلحه استفاده کردند و در آستانه برگزاری نشست اسلو 4 تن از زنان معترض در کابل توسط زنان ناپدید شدند. سوال اینجاست که کشور مدعی ارزش‌های نوین، کشور مدعی دموکراسی چگونه می‌تواند برای یک گروه تروریستی به کشتن هزاران انسان متهم است و اعضای ارشد این گروه که در رده‌های بلند حکومت طالبان گماشته شده‌اند در لیست سیاه شورای امنیت سازمان ملل و امریکا قرار گرفت و انس حقانی عضو ارشد شبکه حقانی متهم به حملات انتحاری در افغانستان در نروژ دعوت شد، همزمان با سرکوب زنان معترض در کابل. چگونه کشورها برای طالبان لابی می‌کند و تریبیون می‌دهد؟ این بسنده نبود که باز هم طالبان با هجوم در یک خانه امن در کابل 29 تن از زنان معترض را با کودکانشان بازداشت کردند و از این زنان اعترافات اجباری و ویدیو گرفتند و حق خواهی زنان معترض را در کابل کیس سازی و برای بیرون رفتن از افغانستان تلقی کردند و اعتراضات زنان را سازماندهی شده از سوی زنان غرب و تمامی این زنان را از پس از رها شدن ممنوع الخروج و هیچ یک از این زنان حق مصاحبه با رسانه‌ها و حضور در شبکه‌های اجتماعی را ندارند و زنان را تحقیر تحت فشار قرار دادند. خانواده‌هایشان را با تهدید و زور اعتراضاتشان را سرکوب کردند و حاشیه‌های اخلاقی درست کردند. برای تحریک روحیه عمومی، حساسیت عمومی جامعه علیه جنبش‌های اعتراضی از اعتراف اجباری این زنان استفاده کردند. با روی کار آمدن طالبان هزاران کودک از 6 ماه شروع برای فروش گذاشته می‌شد. ازدواج‌های اجباری بر اثر فقر، کودک همسری، سانسور زنان، قتل‌های ناموسی، خشونت علیه زنان را هر روز تجربه می‌کنند. صدها تن از زنان و مردان به فروش برده‌هایشان پرداختند تا بتوانند امرار معاش بقیه اعضای خانواده را کنند و بقیه را چند روز زنده نگه دارند. میلیون‌ها کودک در افغانستان خطر از گرسنگی، خطر مرگ تهدید می‌کند. میلیون‌ها انسان بیکار شدند، سرمایه‌ها از افغانستان فرار کرده است. نظام صحی فرو پاشیده است و در هر ساعت 2 زن از اثر مشکلات اولادی جان‌هایشان را از دست می‌دهند. استعدادها در حال فرار از افغانستان هستند. هزاران انسان در پشت مرزهای ایران و پاکستان صف بستند تا افغانستان را ترک کنند. هزاران شهروند افغانستان در کمپ‌ها در بی‌سرنوشتی به سر می‌برند. آزادی بیان وجود ندارد، رسانه‌ها به شدت سانسور می‌شود. تمامی رسانه‌ها رویکرد نشر و پیشان تغییر کرده است. فقط اخبار را می‌توانند نشر کنند. طالبان می‌خواهند. طالبان منتقدین و مخالفینش را بازداشت و شکنجه و سرکوب می‌کرد. طالبان به حریم خصوصی افراد احترام نمیگذارند. تلاشی خانه به خانه در کابل و برخی از ولایات، تجاوز به حریم خصوصی مردم، حتی گالری موبایل افراد را در بازرسی‌هایشان چک می‌کنند. نیروهای امنیتی دولت پیشین را بازداشت، محکمه‌های صحرایی، شکنجه و به قتل می‌رسانند. طالبان حکومت تک قومی تک جنسیتی را ساختند. به جز از پشتونها هیچ یک از اقوام اقلیت‌های مذهبی و قومی در دولت طالبان مشارکت ندارند و زنان در کل صحنه سیاست و جامعه حذف شدند. هیچ زن تحت حاکمیت طالبان در ادارات دولتی کارمند نیست. تمامی کارمندان زن خانه‌نشین شدند و طالبان زنان را کوچک کردند به حوزه خصوصی مرد که به عنوان برده‌های جنسی یا ماشین تولید مثل از زنان کار گیرند. طالبان حتی واژه فارسی را از لوحه‌های دانشگاه‌ها برداشتند و در پی حذف هویتی و زبانی هستند. در تازه ترین مورد چند تن افراد ملکی در پنجشیر و بغلان تیرباران شدند توسط طالبان. یک دختر پسر در ولایت غور به دلیل رابطه عاشقانه کشته شدند توسط طالبان. و اما دردناکتر از همه خاموشی جهان در مقابل افغانستان است. چرا بین انسان اوکراینی و افغانی تبعیض قائل میشن و اوکراینی را برتر میبینند، تجاوز روسیه را محکوم میکنند، اما به طالبان که قاتل هزاران سرباز و مردم ملکی و بیگناه است تریبیون میدهند و برای به رسمیت شناختنش لابی میکنند. واقعا چرا؟ امیدوار هستم جهان همبستگی که در مقابل مردم اوکراین دارد در مقابل مردم افغانستان نیز داشته باشد. توقع ما این است که نهادها و سازمان‌های حقوق بشری خصوصاً اقوام متحدانش در مورد افغانستان فقط به بخش اعلامیه‌ها اکتفا نکنند و دست به کار عملی بزنند. طالبان را تحت فشار قرار دهند تا به حقوق اولیه و ارزش‌های انسانی زنان احترام بگذارند و دست از کشتار و بازداشت‌های خودسرانه بردارند. امیدوار هستم که سازمان‌های ذی‌دخل موارد نقض حقوق بشر در افغانستان را مستند کنند تا صدای قربانیان جنگ شنیده شود. و آخرین نکته‌ای که می‌خوایم بیان این است که همکنون در افغانستان زنکشی، ازدواج‌های اجباری، قتل‌های ناموسی، سنگسار، کودک فروشی، کودک همسری، خودکشی زنان و دختران، قتل‌های مرموز و سرکوب جنبش‌های اعتراضی زنان، بازداشت خودسرانه، کشتن نظامیان پیشین، تلاشی خانه به خانه، تجاوز به حریم خصوصی مردم جریان دارد و هیچ رسانه‌ای نمی‌تواند در داخل افغانستان این جنایات را پوشش بدهد. در خلای حضور رسانه‌های بین‌المللی با استفاده از وضعیت اوکراین و دور از چشم جهان در افغانستان یک فاجعه تمام عیار در حال اتفاق افتاده است. نگذارید صدای این زنان خاموش شود و اگر جهان مداخله نکند دامان این اطرافیت و جهل تروریسم همه جهان را خواهد گرفت. و از شما خواهش میکنم در کنار زنان افغانستان بایستید و صدای این زنان باشید. تشکر از این که به من گوش دادید. به امید جهان برابر و آری خشونت از جنگ. Thank you so much.
And now I'll be reading the translation of Nilofar's speech. Hello everyone, the panelists and the audience. Thank you, Ms. Jimra, for inviting me to this panel session, and thanks to those who organized it. Today, I'll be talking to you about the living conditions of Afghan women under the authoritarian regime of Taliban. First of all, briefly, I would like to let you know the reasons why Afghan women couldn't get their rights throughout the history. Unfortunately, women have not achieved equality anywhere in the world. Afghan women have been fighting for their basic human rights throughout history, but there were reasons why it did not turn into an uprising. And regardless of whether it happened in the Republic government or in the two periods of Taliban regime, the latter under which Afghan women are currently living, women activists were oppressed, tortured, forced to stay at home, and some were even killed. Inhuman social and cultural traditions, patriarchal systems, religious beliefs, and politicization of women's rights have all led to the continuation of oppression on Afghan women for years, as well as the suppression of their voices and their movements. Another reason is the continuous war, and because Afghanistan is a war-torn country, women's rights haven't been thought of as a priority ever. It has been even taboo and something that people rarely paid attention to. Traditional societies have restricted Afghan women in favor of patriarchy, and they have supported patriarchy. They say that they do it because the religion tells them to do so, similar to what the Taliban are doing. They think that they're giving Afghan women the rights, but within the parameters of Islam. During the 4 decades of war in Afghanistan, it was women and children who were the real victims. They were deprived of their basic rights. But in the past 2 decades, after a transitional government was formed in Afghanistan, Afghan women, despite the difficulties they faced, succeeded in obtaining their rights, even if it was minimum. Girls could go to school, they could ride cars, women had the right to vote or to be a candidate. They could take part in politics. There were laws that made illegal for anyone to oppress or sexually harass women. Afghan women were working as lawyers and judges. They were working in national security. They were police officers. There were parliament seats just for them. They were mayors. They were working as actresses and models. Afghan women were journalists. It wasn't easy to achieve all this, and many Afghan women had made sacrifices and opposed their societies, even their own families, to get to these rights after 20 years. But it was all destroyed in a single night, and their lives were plunged into deep darkness they had just come out of. On 15th August 2021, the fake Republic government of Afghanistan, backed by the West, collapsed as Ashraf Ghani escaped Kabul and the Taliban took over the country. We had the experience of living under the Taliban rule, and thus we were always expressive of our concerns about the fake Doha conference between the Taliban and the US. We were demanding them not to let the Taliban determine the future of 40 million Afghans, especially those of women. However, the US signed the agreement with the Taliban in Doha, and therefore released 5,000 Talibs from prison who were accused of murdering thousands of innocent Afghans. The US, in collaboration with Ashraf Ghani and his officials, literally handed over the fate of all Afghans as well as their human, economic, and natural resources to the Taliban. And women became deprived of all their rights, and they were forced to stay home. Thousands fled Afghanistan and are still fleeing, and a terroristic group who know nothing but weapons and killing people started to rule over the country. We weren't really expecting much of their government, as we knew them from their governing back in 1990s. But how could the US, that apparently stands for democracy and human rights, betray Afghanistan's people? It's been 7 months since the start of the Taliban regime, and still girls don't have the right to go to school. Women don't have the right for a proper education and work. They cannot travel freely or choose what to wear. They're erased from the society and are staying at their homes. That's why they started their protest against the rules imposed on them with the slogan, bread, work, and freedom. And you saw how the Taliban suppressed them. Some were arrested and raped in Mazar Sharif. The bodies of 6 of them were found in Baghdad. Some were killed by their families, and some are no longer accepted by their traditional societies. Women activists in Kabul were beaten. Journalists who were covering the protests were arrested and tortured. Taliban used pepper spray and even fired on women activists to stop them. Close to the start of Oslo conference, 4 women activists disappeared. The question is, how can a country like Norway, that stands for democracy and modern values, invite a terroristic group to Oslo who is accused of killing thousands of people, whose members are in the blacklist of United Nations Security Council? How can they invite Anas Haqqani to Oslo, the head of the Haqqani network, who is accused of many explosions in Afghanistan? How are they lobbying for Taliban when they suppress women activists in Kabul? What is more painful than all this is that the world is silent when it comes to Afghanistan. Why do they differentiate a Ukrainian and an Afghan? Why do they think that the Ukrainian is more worthy of sympathy? Why do they condemn the Russian invasion but lobby for the Taliban, who killed thousands of innocent civilians as well as Afghan and foreign military? I hope that the world becomes united for Afghanistan's cause the way they have united for Ukraine. We want the humanitarian organizations, especially the US and its allies, to do more than just mere statements and condemnation. They should take up actions and put pressure on Taliban to respect the natural and human rights of women and to stop arbitrary arrests and killings. I hope the responsible organizations document the violation of human rights in Afghanistan so that the voice of victims be heard. The last thing I want to mention is that right now in Afghanistan, women are arbitrarily murdered, forced to marry and stoned. Children are sold and are married to. Women and girls commit suicide. People are mysteriously murdered. Women activists are suppressed and tortured and arbitrarily arrested. Former military forces are killed and personal houses of people are searched throughout the Afghanistan. No media in the country can document all this. And while the international media is busy with Russian invasion of Ukraine, the worst humanitarian crisis is unfolding in Afghanistan. Do not let the voice of Afghan women be silenced. If the world doesn't step up and take action, this terrorism will spread throughout the world. I ask you to stand with Afghan women and be their voice. I end with the hope to see an equal world without any oppression and war. Thank you for listening. Yeah, it was Nilofar's speech in English, and I'll also add one or two things. I don't have much to add, but as someone who has lived in Afghanistan and as someone who has had the experience of fleeing the country, I can tell you that the pain that Afghans go through, especially women, is tremendous. I mean, they're fighting the traditional patriarchal society for decades. They're fighting against a collapsing economy to find food for their children. They're fighting against a rule and a government that does not even know how to respect them. And they are really strong, they're resilient. Because the history is testifying to that. They're doing it for decades and they're still doing it with that strength. You can tell that by the way they are protesting. They're doing it face to face with the Taliban, with those slogans of freedom, bread and work, because that's what they want. But I think they also need the help of the West, the help of all the world, because sometimes I wonder, why is it that the Taliban continue their operation and they're really in peace with that? And the answer for that is as clear as it can be, because the world is silent when it comes to Afghanistan. No one really cares. And sometimes I think, like inside, like what Nilofar said in her speech, what is different between us and Ukrainians? Why is there a collective response when it comes to their cause and not one when it comes to Afghanistan's cause? Is it just because they are European and we're Asian? Is it because they have blonde hair and blue eyes and we don't? One thing to note here is that I'm not saying that we shouldn't stand with Ukraine, of course, but I would like the world to have the same passion to respond to Afghanistan's crisis as well. I would like to add three practical things that people can do to help Afghanistan and Afghan women. The first is obviously to educate, because the more one knows about a cause, the more they're able to have sympathy with them. And I mean, like you listen to Nilofar's speech and then now you know what's going inside Afghanistan. I think the more empathy and sympathy that people have, the more it's likely for them to drive changes. One thing I would add here is that people should listen to Afghans themselves, because there are so many others who are trying to legitimize the Taliban. And it's better to listen to Afghans themselves rather than those people, because that's what we're saying. Do not legitimize Taliban. And as Masih said, they're oppressors. And if we're silent against what they're doing, it's nothing but the approval of that. They should also donate to organizations. 3 organizations that I would recommend is Kabul Relief, I'll put the names in the chat, and Learn Afghanistan. That's an organization that works with Afghan girls in the remote areas of Afghanistan, especially with their educational journeys. And the third thing is standing with Afghan women in any way that they can. It could be as simple as the online campaign. People were writing there, people would write, I stand with Afghan women in their hands, and take a picture, post it online. You might think that it doesn't affect, but it does. They can join protests, they can sign petitions, and probably even like a simple act as talking with an Afghan and having that connection can help. That's all I had. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Nilofar and Tahmina. To start with, Nilofar, really thanks from the bottom of my heart for presenting this broad analysis on what has been going on and the violation of women's rights in your home country. We have been closely monitoring the situation and trying to provide humanitarian assistance, even in smallest terms. We try to do our best as civil society stakeholders. But I'm pretty sure that you still have loved ones, your family members back in Afghanistan. But you are here with us today at the Commission on the Status of Women, raising awareness on what's going on in Afghanistan. And the dissemination of information, the true source of information through your journalism, is very important to keep us all updated and provide the realities from the ground. Tahmina, would you kindly translate maybe some of my feedbacks to Nilofar? Would that be possible?
Yes, definitely. نیلوفر جان گفتن جمعه جان که از شما تشکری میکنن به خاطر تمام کارهایی که میکنن و به خاطر از اینکه خبرهای واقعی را از افغانستان توسط رشتهتان که ژورنالیسم است به کلگی میرسانین و از خاطر تمام آزاد که در سخنرانیتان اشاره کردین از شما تشکری میکنن که با عمق موضوع داخل شدین و از چیزایی که در افغانستان جریان داره و اونا خبر دادین.
Thank you so much, Jemra.
Thank you so much. And Tahmina, I with all due respect, I agree with you on your call for a collaborative action on what's going on in Afghanistan, and very unfortunate that things are following each other. I mean, we didn't really expect such a crime of aggression in Ukraine to take place, but now millions of people are still continuing to end up in refugee positions. And we do not know, with everything going on in the world since the last 2 years with the pandemic, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Myanmar is already going on like crimes against humanities in that Uyghur women and girls are combating. It takes weeks or so to end up in a position of enforced displacement. So just like you underlined, we have to take this cautious awareness towards every plight of human rights violations. And thank you so much for your contributions and kind assistance today for translation. Thank you so much. Let's turn back to Hafsa for any feedbacks, and we can continue with Busra.
Yeah, our last speaker will be Busra Sarac. Before turning to her, I want to say that, Nilofar and, Tahmina, Rayhan, Masih, they all emphasized the fact that they reminded me of Lila Abdul-Hood's book, Do Muslim Women Need Saving? No, Muslim women do not, saving from anything. They already have their, empowerment. They already have their resilience standpoints. Nilofar just, mentioned that women in Afghanistan, they are already police, they are already judges or teachers. They are already empowered and they have all their own intellectuality. The only thing that is needed is solidarity, coming together, standing up together. That's the only thing. And thank you for stressing out this fact. Thank you. And Busra, our last speaker, but not the least, thank you for being with us. I want to introduce her first of all. Busra is a PhD candidate in international relations, and her PhD is on the representation of Yazidi women's experiences of conflict-related gender-based violence with and after the so-called Islamic State. Her main focus has been to compare Yazidi women's own representation to the major UK and US newspapers' portrayal of women. Her research reveals the broader security implications of gender-based violence committed against Yazidi women and the strategies of Yazidi women to deal with that. Busra, Yazidi women have been facing physical, mental, psychological violence in the hands of ISIS, and they have been captivated as slaves in some cases. And in such a drastic experience, they collect horrible memories of abduction, assault, and rape, unfortunately. As an academic whose work focuses on women's experiences under authoritarian regimes, that I know that we are conducting researches together, what will you share about Yazidi women through a feminist security lens?
Okay, yeah, great. It's a great question, but first of all, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here and hear from the other, the great speakers about the different women's experience of violence under different regimes, indeed. So from feminist perspective, in fact, drawing on feminist perspective, we can, we can provide much more information and more insightful, the discussion about the gender-based violence that the Yazidi women experience. Because in this speech, it's not only about I'm not only talk to you about the sexual violence that they experience, but I'm going to also talk about the broader consequences, the broader implications of gender-based violence that Yazidi women have been currently facing, resulted from the violence they experience. First of all, as you know that in 2019, by the US-led forces, the so-called Islamic State has been physically defeated. But the group, generally speaking, has been known for their extreme use of violence against actually not only women, but anyone who seemed to be an enemy to their expansion. I'm saying expansion because they have had, expansionist policy, which means that they have wanted to, gain more and more power to exert their influences, to strengthen to their rule. And to do that, they attack the cities and instill fear into the minds of people, that they conquered, let's say. But long before this battlefield loses in 2019, actually, as part of their aim to establish, as they call it, this Islamic Caliphate or Islamic State, if you like, they attack Yazidis around the Sinjar district of Kurdistan region of Iraq, which is the homeland to the majority of the Yazidis in this region. Of course, there are also Yazidis in Armenia, in the southern part of Turkey, but this region, the Sinjar district in Kurdistan part of Iraq, is the main homeland. So, in fact, before this attack, very few people had heard of Yazidis. I don't know how many of our listeners have heard of Yazidis before 2014. It's because the outsiders provided very little information about the Yazidi doctrine and their, ethnic identity, religious identity. But first of all, Yazidism is both ethnic and religious identity. They are Yazidis as an ethnic identity, and also, from religious perspective, they are Yazidi. So the reason why they have had little contact with outsiders, with all of us, let's say, is because they believe that they have faced 72, in other accounts, 73 genocides under the regime they lived. It's including Ottoman Empire, Ba'ath regime, under the authoritarian dictatorships such as Saddam Hussein, and more recently under the Islamic State, so-called Islamic State, let's say. So during the campaign in 2014, what happened to Yazidis? In fact, there have been more than 3,000 Yazidi members killed first when they refused to convert to Islam. They have been asked to convert to Islam, but they refused, because in order to be Yazidis are not allowed to convert to other religions. This is their doctrine. So in order, for example, in order for a child to be a Yazidi, both parents need to be a Yazidi. Mother and father need to be a Yazidi. So this raises an important issue for the Yazidi community. I'm going to come this in a minute regarding the consequences of violence they experience. But what I was saying, yeah. So to protect their identity, to preserve their identity, they had little contact with the outsiders, and because of the genocides they lived actually. So regarding the women, the violence that women experience during this campaign, the more than 6,000 Yazidi women and girls were abducted by the ISIS fighters, and there are still, we have been, it's been how many years? 2014, 6, 7, 8 years. There are still roughly 3,000 Yazidi women and girls who are still missing, unaccounted for. We don't know where they are currently. But just an example, last year in 2021, a 7-year-old Yazidi girl was found in the Turkish capital in Ankara. And she was currently, taken into the care of the Turkish social services. And she's the third Yazidi who was to be found in the Turkish capital in Ankara. So which demonstrates that there are, that they have been, taken to the another countries, across borders with the Yazidi, with the ISIS fighters. So this is also another issue that the Yazidi women have raised in the interviews actually. So this is the situation, but we also, I also would like to mention that the Yazidis is not, Yazidi people, the community is not the only community that have been subjected to such treatment. We have also, the Sunni women. I interviewed some Sunni women who have been also displaced and targeted by the ISIS. For example, one of the women lost her eyesight because of the attack, and they have been also displaced. We have also Christians who have been targeted. We have Alawites, we have Kurds. So there are many people, people from different backgrounds indeed actually have experienced violence at the hands of this group. But the scale of brutality and the violence against women have placed these women at the center of the discussion about the violence against women, because the violence they experienced included, abductions, as I just mentioned, forced conversions. The Yazidi women forcefully converted to Islam. They have been forced to pray 5 times a day. They have been forced to memorize the verses of the Quran, the Holy Book. So it also included the executions, alongside the, Yazidi men, elderly Yazidi women were also executed. And also they have experienced sexual violence. But what is important about the sexual violence, although the media put, a lot of emphasis on the sexual violence they experienced, especially from 2014 to 2016, when the ISIS was at its peak, in terms of the seizing territories. The group has had research and fatwa departments in Iraq and Syria, which means that they have been, in fact, they have legitimized the attacks by fatwas. Fatwa is for our listeners, if any of you, don't know the meaning of fatwa, it's the Arabic word, which means the legal opinion given by Islamic scholars on a specific issue. So by fatwas, they legitimize their attacks against the Yazidi women or the Yazidi community in general. And by doing that, they said that the Yazidi women and Yazidi community can be robbed, can be displaced, they can be killed, and they can be taken as slaves. So this is how they legitimize all of their actions, and they also did this in their English language magazine called Dabik. So I'm sure all of you know that the group has had magazines in many different languages, including Turkish, the English, Russian, French, Arabic, etc. So they managed to, legitimize all these attacks. But it is also important to know that it's not the first time that the Yazidi community have been, they subjected to that this kind of treatment. We also, and the problem is that when we look at the gender-based violence, we shouldn't look at the violence that took place only. We need to look at the from broader picture of broader picture of the territory in terms of the political structure of the region. So in terms of for example, when we are talking about the Middle East, in many Iranian and Syrian conflicts, in communities actually, what we see is that the sectarian and ethnic conflicts, right? And in this conflict, what we see is that the women's bodies have been exploited in order to weaken the integrity of the community. And Yazidi women is just one of the case, as I mentioned, in the different regimes that they lead. In the different regimes that they lead. So under ISIS, what they've been, I don't want to use the sex slaves because, as media put it, because it's both sensationalize the issue from media perspective, and also it fails to see the broader problems that women are currently facing and also face under ISIS. So in other words, we could maybe say they have been given to one fighter to another fighter for many reasons. They have also lost their, the family members in front of their lives. Their male relatives actually have been shot by the ISIS in front of them. So they have been also, unfortunately, alongside other security problems, gang raped when they try to escape. So under ISIS, when they try to escape, that there have been, if they were caught, for example, if they managed to escape, it's okay. But if they were caught, there were specific punishments for them. For example, they have been, their children have been taken away from them. They have been beaten to death. So there are many different, the punishments for them if they do it, and it couldn't manage to do that. But the implications of after they fled, after they managed to escape, the implications of gender-based violence is huge. So it's not because the sexual violence that they experience. It's because they have currently facing social insecurities, economic insecurities. They also face insecurities from the government itself, who is unwilling to empower women despite the women's demand for it. So there are many, many security implications for that. Now, I would like to just talk one of the security issues that really challenged both the Yazidi community and also the international community, because it's quite important. The children born of rape, the children fathered by ISIS fighters. So this is a huge security issue for every one of us. And I'm going to tell you why. So I'm going to tell you the situation, what the situation is. So Yazidis, they have both their own children fathered by Yazidi men and also fathered by ISIS fighters. So when they escape, there are two kinds of women, let's say, if you like. So there are Yazidi women who left their children behind and escaped, okay? But why they do that? Because the spiritual leader of the Yazidi community called Baba Sheikh welcome back to women who have been subjected to sexual violence, but not the children. Okay, so some women just left their children behind and left ISIS. But other women, they don't want to lose their children, and they just stayed with ISIS. Okay, so they didn't want to go back to their Yazidi community because of the children. So what is happening now? First of all, there are, as I mentioned, many Yazidi women and children who are missing. So it is the case. So it might be the case that they have been taken across borders, but in the internally displaced camps, this is one of the interesting findings of my research. Actually, some women, in fact, somehow the ISIS fighters managed to contact some Yazidi women in the camps, the internally displaced camps, and they managed to convince Yazidi women that if they had, if they want to come back to their ISIS husband, they're going to have a better life with them because they know the challenges and difficulties, hardship in the camps. The women, the women are not happy with the situation in the camps, and they also, they encourage them that they will have, they are going to unite with their children that they left behind. So interestingly, though, some Yazidi women, despite the cruelty and the violence they experienced, decided to return ISIS. This is so I mean, this is so interesting. I mean, so this is problematic for two reasons. Yeah, in terms of the security issues, in terms of, you know, the insecurity, you know, from insecurity perspective. The first one is that we might see the radicalization of these children, because the children must be around now, given that they have been abducted, you know, the 2014, around like 5, 6, or 7 years old children now. So they are likely to be radicalized under ISIS. Sorry, they don't have any territory now under, I wouldn't say under ISIS, but with the ISIS members. So they have been traveled, you know, we have seen the flow of many foreign fighters into the ISIS territories. And also we might see the further exploitation of the Yazidi women in near future, which is a problematic issue, not only for the Yazidi community, but also for the international community, especially in terms of the radicalization of these children. So this is another problematic issue. So this is just one aspect of the, you know, the security problem they face, you know, the social insecurity. And also they don't believe that the ISIS people, Yazidi women, they don't believe that the ISIS has been defeated, because they say that they rightly claim that, if ISIS was defeated, why the missing Yazidi women and children with us? Why aren't the Yazidi women and children with us? Where are they, right? And they are still believe that there are, they believe that there are still ISIS members. There are still people around them with the mindset of the ISIS, right? This raise a lot of, the security problem and pose a lot of security issues. So I'm going to stop here because of the time limit. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Busra, it was a very informative presentation, but also I feel really terrified by how Yazidi women, along with all Yazidi community members, their identities are in the threat of, being erased, their identities. Yeah. And also additionally, the children, which are, I don't want to say the fruits of, rapes, but they are the children of, entrapment, double-sided entrapment of Yazidi women under ISIS regime, under ISIS, soldiers, or in their own communities. Their identities and the threat that they are gonna be most likely facing in the future.
Yeah. So they are in fact double affected.
Double victimized,
but they are double affected.
Yeah, absolutely. It's horrifying, and also it's not, I think, heard enough in the global context, because there are a lot of different dimensions, perspectives from the feminist security perspective. You touched on different insecurities that they are facing. These are all, not heard enough realities. So we have to raise awareness about that different dimensions of that they face in the security dimension of, Yazidi women or children. It's horrifying. Thank you for touching upon this issue. And I'm looking forward to, hearing your research in the upcoming research. Thank you so much. Cemre, would you like to add anything?
Yes, Busra, thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation. And I also agree on the fact that I don't think there is enough global awareness on Yazidi women, and radicalization of women combatants, sometimes guerrillas, is an important section in the Women and Peace and Security agenda. You highlighted it in many spots, but sometimes women do not have any options but to join the armed forces in order to protect their right to live. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is a very unfortunate situation, and violence can never be justified, but we have to work towards finding ways to protect these women not to end up in such positions. And it's not only for Yazidi women as well. We do see the radicalization of women in different African states as well. Yeah. So it was a very different approach that you raised awareness on this particular agenda. I do want to thank you for that specifically as well. And coming back to wrapping up our session, I would like to share some highlights from my side and read out a couple remarks. Our audience has been very active. Thank you so much over Zoom and YouTube as well. And we all stressed out and joined our claims in the same direction that we must never legitimize dictators, their oppressive policies and actions limiting women's empowerment and their right to practice all forms of fundamental human rights, and staying silent in silence will only empower such oppressive regimes and policies. So we must create our own civil, peaceful platforms to counter back and create a strong global resistance to combat these set of challenges. And yesterday I was in the opening session, the consultation day of NGO CSW that took place in Manhattan, New York. And I would like to quote the UN Women's Executive Director, Sima Bahos, as she said something very relevant to today's agenda, to all the things that we have covered. What she said was that pushbacks will occur, they will happen from oppressive minds, from male leadership minded policies and so on, but we must join our forces to push back the pushback. So it's very important that we, despite of our own differences, which I really see as a treasure, as a plus in our society, this is an agenda that we must join our own all available resources. And I want to read out some nice comments. There have been several of them, but there is one from our he for she, Sadri Altınok, a great leader that supports us in many occasions. He says, women's rights violations have no religion, no color, no nationality. Across the broad cooperation and solidarity is the key to beat unfortunate man-made disease. Thank you so much for this comment. Janine underlined that powerful words for all of our speakers, and thank you for calling out efforts and the need for unity. There has been one very important comment from Claudia. I was going to invite her to the section, but she mentioned that she had to leave. But she's from International Women's Peace Group, a very important stakeholder, and says, greetings. I want to say your presentation is very insightful. We as women should unite all over the world, and that is exactly what we are trying to achieve. Our mission, vision are mainly peace and gender equality. Our aim is to become an organization that represents the voice of women. We believe that building peace and inclusive societies is a prerequisite to achieve true gender equality. Definitely, she has some additional points as well. But thank you so much for your participation, Claudia, representing International Women's Peace Group. And Annalie also says thank you to everyone to keep up the good work. Tal joined the comments by saying that thank you so much for your moving account. You're very courageous, all of us. And lastly, Janine was so active, asking for all the humanitarian assistance links. Thank you so much. And we have one important question in the Q&A section. Do you think the structure of the UN and the Security Council is no longer effective in supporting women's rights and peace? No, not really. It's been 8 years that I have been working in collaboration with several UN bodies to monitor and report human rights violations. And we must acknowledge that UN mechanisms and Security Council are operating on diplomatic bilateral relations. And we must set our expectations right, I believe, for the UN's working vision and mission. Because for such intergovernmental organizations, state solidarity, sovereignty is the key, and they do respect that in any situation. But I am still grateful for such intergovernmental organization and a big fan of UN as well, because they do set important platforms and bridging for us to reach over member states. Like this platform today, we are speaking, this is an official parallel event open to everyone in the platform of UN Commission on the Status of Women. And yesterday, there has been so many member state leadership underlining our leadership, our stakeholder in promoting women's rights. So we must facilitate the existing UN mechanisms, treaty bodies reporting to raise our own opinion. And if you go and check UNHCR's reporting cycles, treaty bodies' home pages, when you Google them, you will see that they create so many opportunities for civil society organizations to reflect, to share the true reality from the field to the treaty bodies, write up reports. They do publish so many of the inputs, policy briefs coming in from civil society organizations. So please do create more opportunities for your organizations to be active at UN mechanisms. There are so many platforms that we can facilitate, be active. It's been almost a decade that I was able to facilitate such platforms, but I encourage to everyone to reach out to us. My colleague also shared our emails, me and Hafsa's, our Twitter account, Set Them Free. Please do reach out to us. And Hafsa, do you want to say anything before we wrap up our session?
I strongly agree with what you said, and on top of what you said, I want to say that I really appreciate all the work, all the studies, all the research done on the woman whose voice is not heard enough by all these women, not by other, but by others that speaking on behalf of us. So I know that Nilofar, Rayhan, Masih, Tahmina, Busra, you, Cemre, and me, myself, we are, conducting all different types of research and studies that on these women, but by these women, through their own voices, through interviews, researches. So this is valuable. This is incredibly valuable. So thank you for all this effort. I am really honored and privileged to be among all these women. Let's keep up the good work. Let's talk, and let's build this solidarity, which is very important in the fight against violence against women.
Thank you so much for having us as well.
Thank you, Busra, Nilofar, Tahmina, Rayhan, Masih. They had to leave because they have other commitments. But today is the first day of Commission on the Status of Women. There are thousands of events that are going to take place within these 2 weeks. Please be active. Please reach out to relevant other organizations that are working in line with your mission and vision through NGO CSW events platform. Facilitate your social media accounts, and do reach out to us to create more collaborative platforms to raise awareness on such agendas. Thank you so much for tuning us today.